Extremely delighted to have him talking to us about new Russia and relations with China, Korea, maybe, and Asia Pacific. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. If everybody can speak Russian here, I'm ready to speak Russian. If not, then I'll try to speak English. Because I talked to so many people today, and all of them seem to know Russian. But anyway, let me speak in English. And of course, I'm delighted too to be here and to have this opportunity to exchange views on the area. And of course, we know that both Russia and Australia belongs to this area, so it's quite important for us to exchange views on the subject. If you remember, Gorbachev had a very comprehensive policy in the Asia-Pacific region, clear-cut policy, and a policy which I think was popular in Asia, at least some elements of that policy. And the question is, do we still have that policy? And my answer would be, we don't have this policy anymore for a number of reasons. The first reason is that the policy of Gorbachev was a policy of a communist superpower which wanted to improve itself and which wanted to improve relations with the outside world, including countries of the Asia-Pacific region. And now we don't have that superpower anymore. There is no Soviet Union left. We have a new state. It's called Russia, and it's not even a communist state. So this is another difference with Gorbachev's time. And this is a new state. We don't have a new constitution. We don't have any national anthem. We don't even have armed forces yet. So this is another reason for us to have a different policy. Then we have a very severe crisis inside our country, political, economic, ideological, ethnic, etc. And of course, because of this, this kind of situation influences our behavior in the world. Then there is another issue which we have now and which we didn't have before. We have new neighbors, the former parts of the Soviet Union, and problems with these states are very severe. And we have to solve the basic problems. The basic problem with these states: are we going to be one political entity, Commonwealth of Independent States or something else? Or we're going to be just friends or allies? Or we're going to be foes and even enemies? And there is such a possibility for developments in this direction. So this is something else which influences our behavior in the world. Plus, our society, from my point of view, is still divided ideologically on what kind of society we should have and what kind of foreign policy we should have. We have some people who say we should be a part of the West, that before 1917 Russia was a European state, and then Bolsheviks took it away from Europe. And now we have to go back to the family of civilized nations, and it's easy to do because this family is ready for us. They're ready to embrace us and to help us. So this is one of the views we have in Russia with our foreign policy. And this view is shared by the government, but as I said, there are a lot of people who don't agree with this kind of attitude. The second view is that we had a very good state under the Tsar, then Bolsheviks made our state not so good, but still it was a superpower. And then the West, CIA, Americans, with the help of their agents in Russia, Gorbachev, Yeltsin, and others, they destroyed this beautiful state, and we have to make our state strong again. And the West is an arch enemy of Russia because the West always wanted Russia to be poor and weak. So we have to be tough with the West, and we have to take back all those lands which have been taken from us by Americans and Gorbachev and Yeltsin, their friends in the Ukraine, etc., etc. And the third point of view is that it's okay to be friends with the West. We have to be open to the West, but Russia cannot be a part of the West because it's different. It has always been different. It's different now. And not only culturally, not only economically, but geographically, 3/4 of our territory is a nation. So we cannot be like France or England. We cannot forget about China, Japan, Korea, and we cannot become like France and England in many respects. So Russia can be a bridge between the East and the West, but it has to have its own foreign policy, it has its own political interest. So this is the third point of view. And there is something else which prevents us from having a foreign policy the way we used to have it under Gorbachev. It's I would call it an organizational crisis in our foreign ministry. You know, we had the foreign ministry of Russia and we had the foreign ministry of the Soviet Union. Then the Soviet Union collapsed, and Yeltsin told people at the Russian foreign ministry to take over the building of the Ministry of the Soviet Union. So these people, most of them young people, some of them people who used to work in the Soviet ministry and were fired from that ministry for not being good diplomats. So these people came to the Soviet foreign ministry, took it over, and of course you have a lot of problems because of this. You have experienced diplomats who have spent 20, 30 years serving the Soviet Union in many countries and very knowledgeable, and now some of them are fired, some of them are demoted, and morale is very low in the ministry because people say we don't know what's going to happen with us, and what is the criteria for being a good diplomat? Is it to say something nice about Yeltsin, or it's your knowledge and things like that? So this is something else which, you know, when you go to the ministry, you can feel it, you know, that people don't have time to think about strategies, about policies. They think about, you know, how to survive and how to be able to, you know, to keep jobs at the ministry. So for all these reasons, we have a different policy now, I think, in general and in particular toward the Asia-Pacific region. And I would say that the thrust of our foreign policy now is to guarantee survival of our state, to prevent this crisis in economic, political, ideological sphere to develop, and to bring our country back to a normal track. As our foreign minister says now, Kozyrev, he says that every nation is a human, is the same as a human being. Every human being wants to be healthy and rich, and we want Russia to be healthy and rich. So our foreign policy is determined by this factor. And I would say that we have three general directions to guarantee in our foreign policy to guarantee our reforms and to guarantee that Russia survives. First of all is our relations with the former parts of the Soviet Union. This is priority number one. We have to solve these problems. Are we going to be friends or enemies? The second priority is the West, because our government, as I said, wants us to be a part of Europe, to be a part of the Western civilization, and they think that only the West can help us economically, to give us technology, ideas, investments, and to help us with disarmament. So that's where we have to, you know, to look. And the third priority is our neighbors, including our neighbors in Asia. First of all, China, Japan, and Korea. And our government understands it's important to develop relations with them, but I think they understand it, but they don't do it. And if you talk to our Asian specialists, I think each of them would say that not enough attention is paid to that part of the world. And people who live in those countries, I mean governments of those Asian countries, of Asia and the Pacific, they would agree with this analysis. They would say that the Russian government doesn't pay enough attention to that area. Why? Again, as I said, our government is preoccupied with the relations with the Ukraine, Georgia, Armenia, and with the West. And they don't have enough time, and sometimes they don't understand how important it is for Russia, because if you look at our government, the people in the government, all of them have been trained in Western countries, like let's say Gaidar, number 2 in our government. He was trained in San Francisco. He has a lot of friends in the United States, and he understands the United States, and he thinks they understand us, so that's where his priority. As far as Asia is concerned, I think it's less attention, less than this area deserves. Nevertheless, we have diplomacy there, and I would say that this diplomacy is to develop relations with Asian countries, to be friends with all of them, to avoid any conflicts with any of these countries, and to to get as much economic assistance as we can from that area too. And because we have nothing else in our policy nation, no strategic designs, no ideas of security networks or security systems like Gorbachev had. If I want to describe our policies now in Asia-Pacific region, I think I should concentrate on our bilateral relations with at least major countries of that area. And I would start with China because this is, from my point of view, and it's an objective fact, it's the most important country for us in Asia. And I would like to go back to 1989 when Gorbachev visited China. As you remember, he visited China in May of 1989, and he returned back home very happy, extremely happy. It was kind of euphoria in Russia, and this euphoria continued for about 2 weeks. Then Tiananmen affair, Gorbachev was puzzled and everybody else, and after that our two countries went their separate ways. Before, if you remember, from 1995 when Gorbachev came to power, our countries were approaching each other, economically, in economic outlook, ideologically, so they were getting closer and closer. From 1989, again, different roads. And Chinese leadership, especially those old men who came to power after Tiananmen affair, who became more prominent in power, like Yang Shanghu, An Zheng, Bo Yibo, and people like that. They, of course, didn't like what they saw in the Soviet Union. They were really puzzled, horrified, shocked what was happening with the Communist Party in Russia and what was happening in Eastern Europe. And they were saying to us, what are you doing? The first time in the history of mankind, the ruling party voluntarily gives power to somebody else. And to whom? To maniacs, prostitutes, mafia types, idiots, and things like that. And they were saying, can you explain it? Why you do it? I mean, let them take this power by force, but don't give it to them. And of course, even more dangerous, and what they didn't like completely, what I said about this already, that there was events in Eastern Europe. If you remember, Czechoslovakia, well, first Hungary, then East Germany, Czechoslovakia, and then finally Romania, when the best friend of Chinese leaders, Comrade Ceausescu, was shot by his own people. And Chinese leaders were sure that it was done not only under the influence of our perestroika, of Gorbachev, but that our agents actually took part in all those events. And some of them still think this way. So they were horrified, and as we know, in November, December of 1989, they had Politburo meetings every day, day and night, talking about Russia, what to do with the Soviet Union. Some people, like Wang Zhen, for example, he said Gorbachev is a scoundrel. Actually, he used even worse words in Chinese. And we cannot just sit and listen what he says and what he does. We have to fight. So let's have polemics with him. And they were on the verge of having these polemics. But then in 1990, in April, their Prime Minister Li Pen came to Russia, and he went back to China very satisfied. He said when he came back that, first of all, we have to have good relations with the Soviet Union because it's our neighbor, and because for 20 years we had troubles with Russia. It's enough that nobody won, and it was so bad for Chinese people and for the Soviet people. So only for this reason we have to keep relations good with them, though maybe they're not good people. But this is only factor number one. But the second factor, as he said, and many people in the Chinese government agreed, and especially Deng Xiaoping, of course, who was and still is man number one, he agreed with that, of course, Gorbachev is a bad man, he's a revisionist. Of course, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union is a bad party. But these people, they're much better than people like Yeltsin and all those other people who are now coming to power, who are becoming more and more prominent. So it's in Chinese national interest to help the Communist Party of the Soviet Union to stay in power. Maybe it's a bad party, but still they're communist, and you can reform them, not like those people. And they became extremely active in relations with our Communist Party. Delegations from China would come every day, and the purpose was not just to be friends, but to influence the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, explaining in a very subtle Chinese way that you know, look at China, we do like this, and why don't you do like that? You are the birthplace of Lenin, you are the birthplace of socialism, and everything depends on you. So, you know, I mean, be tough with those guys you have in your country, like we did in 1989. And they were finding a very good response from the people who used to work in the Central Committee of the Communist Party and in the party generally, because after 1899, it was clear for many of the people in the Central Committee that Gorbachev was a traitor, and actually he said that he wanted to improve communism, but actually what he was doing, he was destroying communism, voluntarily or involuntarily. There were different views on the nature of that man, his behavior. But Chinese were real comrades, so I was present at many of those meetings, and conversation could go like this. Let's say Ding Guanggen, who is an alternative member of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China, comes to Moscow, and he talks to the first secretary of the Communist Party of Moscow. And Ding Guanggen says, how can we explain the behavior of your mayor, Popov? How come he's so bad? And the secretary says, well, it's very easy to explain. He's an agent of CIA, his salary is $150,000 American dollars, and that's why he behaves like this. And he says, why can't you stop him? Well, because we have Gorbachev. Only because of him we cannot stop this man. So conversations would go like this, and they would discuss American imperialism, how it was necessary to unite forces against Americans who wanted to undermine and destroy communism, not only in China, not only in the Soviet Union, but all over the world, and things like that. So relations were developing very well among these two parties. Of course, our party was going down, but their party still is #1 in the country. And then Jiang Zemin, the Secretary General of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China, requested to pay a visit to the Soviet Union in May of 1991. And Deng Xiaoping told him to prepare well for this meeting, to fresh up his Russian, because he used to know Russian. He used to work in Moscow in the 50s, and he even studied Russian before coming to the Soviet Union. And he refused to meet anybody in Moscow but Gorbachev. He refused to meet Yeltsin and Sobchak, the mayor of Leningrad, and he made a point meeting with Gorbachev that, you know, I didn't want to meet those people, and I won't meet them, just you. And Deng Xiaoping told Jiang Zemin, you learn your Russian, you meet with Gorbachev, and you try to understand what kind of man is this, and you try to influence him. You talk just without anybody, I mean, just two of you. So he came to Moscow, they kissed. It was a very warm meeting, very good meeting, and Jiang Zemin advised Gorbachev to be nicer to the military men in the Soviet Union, saying that, you know, me in China, when I go to provinces, I don't pay attention to party officials. They are under me, you know, no problem. Military men, you have to watch them. So when I come to the province, I shake hands, you know, I go, first of all, I see them. And Gorbachev said, yes, I respect our military men, things like that. And so everything was okay. And then, of course, August of 1991, events in Russia, and the Chinese ambassador requested a meeting with our new president, Comrade Yanayev. And he was the only foreign ambassador who requested such a meeting, and he was granted this meeting in one hour. He was received in the Kremlin, and Yanayev was drunk as always, and his hands were shaking. And the ambassador asked Yanayev, what's wrong with Gorbachev? He said, he's sick, gravely sick. And the ambassador said, oh, I regret it very much, and I think that from now on our relations will be much more closer. And Yanayev agreed with this, and he sent greetings to 15 Chinese leaders, which is, I think, the world record. He sent to all of those, you know, old men, you know, men in power, like Deng Xiaoping. So everything was okay for 3 days. And then on the 21st, I remember I was at home, and I know quite a few people at the Chinese embassy, and they started to call me, not only me, of course, I'm talking about my own experience. So one man calls and says, where is Khrushchev, the chief of the secret police? And I say, well, I heard on the radio he fled from Moscow. He said, is he coming back? I say, well, I think they'll bring him back. He said, you don't think he'll be in power? I said, I don't think. Then another man called. So it was, you know, a very tense situation in the Chinese embassy. And then after everything was finished with the coup d'etat, there was complete silence in China and at the Chinese embassy in Moscow for 2 months. Nothing in Chinese papers on the Soviet Union, nothing from the Chinese embassy. They waited. And then, of course, they resumed their activities. And if you look at their attitude now toward Russia, of course, they don't like what's happening in Russia. They don't like anti-communism, and they don't like Yeltsin, without any question. But I think their policy is very active. They say we want to be friends with you, and you can see that they mean what they say. And why they want to be friends with us? Many reasons. And I would say that, well, of course, we're big powers, we're neighbors, it's natural, but there are 3 specific reasons why they're so active, and I would say that, that's what actually they say. They say we're very interested in having good relations with you, and we have 3 particular reasons for this. The first reason is that we are interested in Russia to be united and to be stable, because if Russia keeps on disintegrating, if you go into pieces and if you have a chaos, sooner or later we're going to have the same situation in China. Especially that we have minorities living on both sides of the border, and when they say Russia, they mean, of course, the whole former Soviet Union. Tajiks, Turkmenic, Kazakh, Uzbek who live near Chinese borders, and they have similar people in Xinjiang, and so they're very afraid of that. And they say, so we want you to be stable. If you go to pieces, we go to pieces. Number 2, they say we need a strong Russia because Americans have become too arrogant. They think that they can do whatever they want in the world, and the only way to stop Americans is not to be united because we're different countries, but to have, different centers of power to balance Americans, to keep them, under control. So they say we need a strong China, we need a strong Russia, and as many strong countries as possible. So that's why we think you should have a post-check in nation, things like that. And the third reason is economic. They're very interested in our market. They produce a lot of things which they cannot sell to other countries but to Russia because their quality is not good enough, let's say, for Japan, for America or Australia, but they're very good for us. So they're quite active, and not only on the government level, but on the private businessmen's level. And to give you just one example, as Professor Witkov said, I come from the Diplomatic Academy in Russia, and we've signed already 4 agreements with different Chinese organizations to open 4 Chinese restaurants at our academy. With Shandong province, with, if you know, there is a plant in Sichuan, it produces a wine called Guanzhun. So, and they say it's the best wine in China, so they want to open a restaurant and like a winery, and it's serious, we have negotiations, they come to our place, and we have many buildings where they're ready to do it. So they're very active. And I have a friend who is a correspondent of Zhongde Tininbao, this Komsomol newspaper of China. And he calls me every day and says, I have another group of businessmen. They've come to Moscow and they need partners. Can you find me partners? I said, well, I have nothing to do with business. He said, well, you said you have so many students at your academy, talk to them. And he says, I don't have time to write articles because I have this pressure from businessmen in China coming to Moscow. And it's, if you talk to any diplomat at the Chinese embassy, you find the same problem. I mean, so we find this interest from the China's side, and they complain that they don't see reciprocity on the part of the Russian government. And from my point of view, and maybe I'm completely wrong, I think they're partly right. And why our government is not as active as Chinese are toward us? For a number of reasons. The first one is that they consider themselves Democrats, themselves to be Democrats. And so Chinese communists, some people whom they don't like, especially that they dealt with Russian communists, and they have come to the conclusion that Russian communists were awful, so they presume Chinese communists are the same way. And they even think it's dangerous. If you're a Democrat, you go to China, then you come back and you can be criticized, why you go to that country. Then another reason is that some of them in the government, I'm not saying everybody, but I suspect some of them think that China would collapse this year or next year. The communist regime, and I think this view is supported by the view of many Chinese, even by those who work in Moscow, at the embassy. Because like there are people who say that China is in very deep trouble and we can have an explosion this year or next year. That's what some Chinese diplomats say, even in the presence of other Chinese diplomats, not the ambassadors. And just to give you an example of, for me it's amazing. Last year, was it last year, when the Communist Party was still in power in Russia, we had a meeting with the very high-level Chinese Communist Party delegation, and I was sitting next to the man who was number 4 and still number 4 in the international department of the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party. And the leader of our delegation says to the leader of the Chinese delegation, your party is very experienced, Chinese party is very experienced, and we have a lot to learn from your party. And this man, number 4, he says to me, I didn't know him, he was not my friend. And he says to me, what can you learn from our party? How to crush people with tanks? So this is the attitude. And when you have this kind of views, even in the Central Committee, you can expect that even if there wouldn't be pressure from people to change things, it would be pressure inside the ruling class to change things, like it happened in Russia. When Gorbachev came to power, and a lot of people agreed with him that we had to have those changes. So anyway, these people in our government, some of them think that China will start changing pretty soon, so why to deal with these people, It's better to deal with the people who come after them. And it's even better to stay away from these people, then the new leaders would be more friendly to us. And as they say, look at Americans, they wait for the new government so they don't get involved directly with this present leadership. And another reason for not being so active, as I said, the Russian government is too busy with other problems, and they don't see in China a country which can provide, real economic aid, credits, and everything to Russia. So they're not as active as some other directions. So this is our relations with China, and I'd like to say a few words about Taiwan. It's a separate case, of course, and it's a very difficult problem. In 1989, when Gorbachev went to China, we signed a communique with the People's Republic, with the People's Republic of China, and we stated in this communique that there is just one China, and the government of China, this usual position of most of governments in the world, and everything was okay. They didn't talk about Taiwan much, but after 1989, problems started to develop. Our mayor of Moscow, Popov, went to Taiwan. He visited in the Taipei hospital work IC, a famous Chinese dissident. He shook his hand and said, see you in Beijing. And this picture went all over the world. And of course, this picture was presented to our Minister of Foreign Affairs by the Chinese ambassador, and he requested explanations. Then, a few days later, we had a visit from the Chinese ambassador, and he said, we have information that your military people are trying to sell submarines to Taipei. And of course, we said, can't be true. So I called our Minister of Defense and talked to about 10 generals, and nobody knew anything about this. And finally, I talked to one admiral who said, sure, we're going to sell submarines to Taipei. and I said, well, but don't you know that Peking is against it? He said, well, if Peking pays more money, we'll pay. We'll sell the submarines to Peking. And of course, events like this, everyday problems, everyday explanations, how come this man goes to Taiwan, how come he shakes hands with the grandson of Chiang Kai-shek, etc., etc. And so when Jiang Zemin was preparing to come to China, we drafted our communique, our version of communique, and we had negotiations in Moscow with the representatives of the Communist Party of the PRC, because they, when they were preparing this visit, they didn't trust the ambassador. So, because the ambassador proposed to have a meeting with Yeltsin, so they said the embassy has nothing to do with this visit, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs has nothing to do. It's the Central Committee business. So they came to Moscow. We gave them our draft, and in this draft we said the Soviet Union will develop unofficial cultural and economic relations with the peoples of Taiwan. These ties would not lead to the official recognition by the Soviet Union, etc., etc., and there is just one China. And when they saw this draft, they said, who is the idiot who's written this draft? And I was one of them, and I said, well, we have some idiots there. So finally, we couldn't agree on anything. They said, we can't have this kind of formula in the document. And we said, why? They said, well, we'll say, look at America, look at France, Australia, any country. They have relations with Taiwan, and official relations, they have trade, and you don't object. They say, first of all, you're a socialist country. Secondly, you're a great socialist country. If you do it, it's a bad example for everybody. Thirdly, America had relations on this level with Taiwan, now it's on this level. It goes down, and your relations go up, which is very strange to our listeners. And we said, but the relations of the US with Taiwan is still here, and our relations with Taiwan is still here. So let us, move, have the same level of relations as America has. So let them go down and not let us improve our relations. But they said, no, our leaders will never allow this. There is no way, and Jiang Zemin won't come to Moscow. So finally they left, and we had to go to Beijing to reinitiate this communique. Finally we agreed with them. And then they said, we'll look at your relations with Taipei the Chinese way, like this, with one eye. We said, but it's convenient to have this on paper. Then you wouldn't be nervous every time. We would know our limits. We can do this, but we cannot do that. No. So what's happening now? I think that they are not as pushy as they used to be because they have enough troubles with us. And they're afraid that Russia would collapse, and so they don't want to be too tough with us on this issue. And then they're improving their own relations with Taipei, so their psychology is changing at least a little bit. And so, like 2 years ago, I was trying to go to Taipei, and I talked to Chinese diplomats in Moscow, and I said, "Can I go to Taipei?" They said, "I'm crazy. You belong to the foreign minister, and you want to go to Taipei." This year when I said to them, I didn't even ask their permission, I said, I'm going to Taipei. Some of them said, we envy you, we'd like to see that part of China too. But I don't, maybe I sound too optimistic because when I was in Taipei, we met quite a few officials. And then we left Taipei and came to Australia, to Canberra. I went to the National Library and decided to look at Zhongyang Zhibao, the newspaper published by Gomindan. And then I saw my picture, 4 days in a row on the first page, and my words, we are ready for consular relations with Taipei. And I never said it. So I don't know what's going to happen with me in Moscow when I go back, and I'm really scared. Because, on the first page and 4 days in a row. And what I actually said, they were saying that we need to have some mechanism, to issue visas. I said, sure. They said, like Americans, some kind of, yeah, I said, we can find something. But I never said it was consular relations because it sounds very official. So anyway, now I'm saying that they are more flexible, but I'm not sure I'm right. So we'll see what happens. And talking about the future of our relations, I think this ideological factor is quite important. We have differences now, and we know from the history that we had ideological differences, and because of this we had troubles for 20 years with China. And we had a Cold War with the United States because of ideological, basically, differences. So it's an important issue. And it's not only pure ideology, we're neighbors, and they're afraid that our ideology will be penetrated into their country, and if we're successful, really successful, it would be even greater danger for China, because then the people would say, okay, the birthplace of Lenin forgot about Lenin, and now they live better and better, and they have more and more democracy, and so, it's understandable. So this is the first factor, and the second factor, if something happens in China. I don't know, and it's a separate subject to talk about internal affairs, internal situation in China, but if something happens, and there are some reasons for changes in China, as everybody understands. So if something happens, I'm sure it would be a chaos, even worse than in Russia, and then it's hard to predict what can happen in our relations and in this part of the world as a whole. If you have a chaos in Russia, you have a chaos in China, it can be a very difficult situation. So I'll stop talking about our relations with China, and if you don't mind, I'll talk about our relations with Korea. Mm-hmm. And I forgot when I started, so...
It's about 11, so if you go to 12...
12?
Well, no, well...
Okay, well, let me stop then. I'll say a few words about our relations with Korea and Japan.
Yeah.
And if I
we'll,
have...
we'll go on to half past, so in fact, we'll get longer.
Oh, okay. And if I have enough time, I'll say then a few words about our relations in the China, Mongolia, but Korea. With Korea, you know, North Korea, we're still allies with North Korea if you look at the documents. But actually, we're not allies. Ideologically, we're enemies. They hate us. And I'm not saying that we hate them, but if you read our newspapers, you would get a very strong feeling that the new Russia doesn't like Korea because, you know, what they write about Kim Il-sung, a bloodthirsty bandit, you know, Hitler, Stalin, and they used to complain. They used to go to the Central Committee of the Communist Party, then to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, then people from this organization would send them to talk to our journalists because we explained to them that we had democracy. And it was hard for them to talk to journalists. But now they don't talk to anybody because they understand it's a new situation in Russia. There is no way to stop it. So ideologically, we're quite different now. Politically, we don't have any political ties. When Gorbachev was in power, they tried to invite him for 3 or 4 years. He never went there. And then in 1990, people like Yenayev and all those coup d'etat leaders who were quite strong in 1990, they tried to invite Kim Il-sung, or at least his son, or at least Kim Ye-nam, their foreign minister. At that time, they refused to go. They said, nothing to discuss. Too late, you have friends in South Korea, so talk to them. And now nobody invites anybody. We don't have any political ties. And actually our ambassador, we want to change our ambassador in North Korea. We cannot do it because the old one cannot fly back. You know, we have airfloat service, but it's so expensive now. So nobody flies. So they've canceled already 3 or 4 flights from Pyongyang, and no even airlink. He is waiting for some passengers to be able to fly back to Moscow. And politically, and then economically, well, our trade used to be quite substantial. We were the main suppliers, as you understand, militarily and any other way to North Korea. Now the trade volume is $300,000 American, which is not much. And if you talk about economic cooperation in other fields, I can just give you one example because nothing else I can remember. They have a restaurant in Moscow, it's called Pyongyang, and if you go to that restaurant, you see a lot of South Korean businessmen whining and dining there because there is no other Korean restaurant in Moscow, and Koreans like their own food. And what these people eat, and they watch on a wide screen a movie about Kim Il-sung, his speeches, and the movies about South Korean policemen beating South Korean students. And it's all over the wall, so any place you sit, it's there. And they watch and they eat. That's all we have economically. And and militarily, our foreign minister Kozyrev, he said a month ago, after his visit to South Korea, that we have to stop all military ties with North Korea, because having those military ties, we cannot expect having good relations with South Korea, which is very important to us. And he said that it's our own national interest to stop Korea from having nuclear weapons. And of course they have already nuclear capability, but I don't know how can we stop them, because if I were Kim Il-sung, I would have this nuclear capability. He has so many enemies now, and actually no friends, even in China. I remember I asked about 2 or 3 years ago, there was a gossip that North Koreans were testing their nuclear weapons in China. And I asked some Chinese, well, not actually diplomats, but people from the Central Committee of the Communist Party, I said, is it true that Koreans testing weapons, nuclear weapons in China? And one of them said, do you think Chinese are so stupid as to allow this clown to test weapons nuclear weapons in China? So, as I said, this is our official policy now, no military ties, and to stop North Korea from developing economic links. And I think our policy toward North Korea is not correct, because we're too tough with North Korea, like Americans, even more in some ways, and we shouldn't put this government into the corner. They are maybe bad people, but they're human beings, and you can expect their reaction when you put them into the corner. They will develop nuclear capability. They would be, it's better to be flexible with them and to try North Korea to change slowly. And I think people in South Korea, the South Korean government supports this idea. They understand now it would be too dangerous for South Korea if everything collapses in North Korea and millions of Koreans would, go from North Korea to South Korea. And South Korean economy is not as strong as German economy to sustain such a weight. So I think we should be more flexible with North Korea. And our relations with South Korea, we still, I think, have a honeymoon with South Korea. And I would say it's very unusual. We have very unusual relations with South Korea. I would say it's the only case in maybe in mankind's history when people of one country think about the second country better than people who live in that country. What I mean is that when you meet South Koreans, and every Russian, or almost every Russian, thinks that South Korea is a paradise because we saw it on TV and this new Olympic Games and Korean products and etc. etc. So when you say to South Koreans that you have a paradise, because they laugh, they say we have inequality, we have corruption, we have exploitation, we have so many poor people. And actually many South Koreans are unhappy with the situation in their own country, and so they laugh when we praise them. And at the same time they praise us and we laugh. They say, Russia, your economy is beautiful, you have real industry, your technology is better than American, because Americans use Japanese computers, Japanese technology to send spaceships up there, and you do it on your own. Then they say that your cultural level is very high. If you watch Russian TV now, you could hear every day people saying that the basic problem we have now is our very low cultural level. That's why we have so many problems. Maybe it's right, maybe it's not, but that's what many of us say. Koreans say your cultural level is up there and our cultural level is down there, and you're so cultured, and you have so many plants, so many factories, and you can overcome your difficulties in a day or 2 or 3 years. So very strange way, but it's the emotional side of our relations. And of course there are some other factors which make our relations quite dynamic. And first of all is the economic factor. Koreans are very interested in our market for 3 basic reasons. The first reason is that we have natural resources like Australia has. And they're very close to Korea, and they're much cheaper than Australian resources, because in Russia we have now a chaos and you can use different methods, sometimes not even legal, to get these materials very cheaply. And secondly, they need our market to sell goods to us, because as you of course know, they encounter problems on many markets in Europe and many other countries, and they think they can sell their goods into Russia, and you can sell anything now in Russia, especially when you exchange it for natural resources. And it's quite profitable for our companies who do it, and it's quite profitable for Koreans who get, for their computers, for their video recorders, they get all these resources. And the third reason is that they actually, they really think that we have very good military technology, and they say, give us an access to this technology and we'll help you to rebuild Russia and to make Korea even stronger. And even, again, an example from our own life, our diplomatic academy, we have very close relations with South Korean embassy, and almost every day they request us to write a book on all our military plants and factories. And they say, well, it's not for any bad purposes, we're not going to give this textbook or book to Americans, it's we want to know with whom we can deal, what we can buy, and how we can cooperate. And they're extremely active in this field, all of the companies. And of course, if you talk to Korean businessmen, quite a few of them are not happy, and they criticize our laws. They say you have a lot of crooks and things like that. But basically, they're the most active country in our in Russia and in the former Soviet Union. And if you go now to Moscow, it looks even like Seoul. You have advertisements all over Moscow: Samsung, Lucky Gold Star, Teo, Hyundai, all over the place. And if you go from the airport, international airport, you see, you know, every 2 meters you have this Korean advertisements, and they used to make them in English, in Russian, and now they make them in Korean, even don't bother to translate them. They do it for the Korean businessmen who come, for Korean tourists, and you know, because everybody knows already it's Korean, and they have the symbols, Samsung, so they're very active. And this is economy. And politically, Korea is very interested, South Korea is very interested in Russia because, you know, their attitude toward Japan, and they say openly to us, we need you against Japan, we need you against the United States because we don't want to be forever under the United States, and we need you to influence China because China is too friendly with North Korea, and if we have very good relations with you, sooner or later Chinese will become envious of this kind of relations, and that they will move more actively, politically into South Korea. And then the cultural aspect, I already mentioned this attitude, you know, you are so good, they say to us, and we say to them, you are so good. And just a few interesting things. It's a fashion now in South Korea to go to Moscow. Every politician wants to go to Moscow. And every politician wants to have a PhD in Moscow. So last year, No-Dae-woo, the president of South Korea, when he visited Moscow, he got an honorary PhD from the Moscow University. Now Kim Dae-jun, who is leader of the Democratic Party, who wants to be the president of South Korea, he wants to get his PhD from our academy. And we've published his book. It's going to be out on the 24th of June. And he's coming to Moscow for an official presentation of his book. It's called Peace and Democracy. It was published in the US many years ago. We've translated it. And he's going to give this book to Yeltsin, to all our leaders. Then he goes back to South Korea, and then he comes again for his PhD. But he says No-Dae-woo is a crook, that's why he got his honorary degree. And I want to have a real degree. So we're going to have a real, you know, what you call defense of this degree. And in Russia, it's a very difficult process. You know, you have to make a lot of things. So anyway, he's coming. And then Samsung representative in Moscow, Hyundai representative in Moscow, Lucky Gold Star representative in Moscow. All of them want to have PhD from our academy. We have 10 students from South Korea, diplomats. We have about 20 students who are not diplomats from South Korea. They're journalists, want to study at our academy or some other institution. So it's remarkable. And I would say that our relations are very good, and I wish that we could have such relations with all the rest of our neighbors. And I'd like to say in this connection a few words about our relations with Japan, which are not so beautiful and good. And as a matter of fact, we never had good relations with Japan. You know, never, not if you look through the whole history of our relations, and it's unique too, you know, when we have this kind of history of relations. And we can talk for a long time about our relations with Japan, but I just concentrate on this main problem, territories. You know the Japanese position, of course, you know, islands, and like Japanese communists say, all those Kuril Islands, because Lenin taught us that you cannot annex other people's territories. And this was an annexation, so you have to give back all the islands. But the official position of the government, 4 islands. And we have a debate in Russia what to do about this. We have people who say, of course, we have to give those islands back. Why? Because first of all, they belong to Japanese, and we have to be fair with them. It's Stalin who took them, and we have to correct his crimes and mistakes. Number 2, if we give these lands, these islands back to Japan, we'll get a lot of assistance from Japan. And it's only Japan from Asia who can help us. Maybe it's the only country in the world who can really help us because they've got the money. And only if Japan goes to Russia, all other countries from Asia will go to Russia. And they say, these people say that we have to give these islands back for another reason, and the reason is that Japan is getting stronger and stronger, and Russia is getting weaker and weaker, so it's better to give these islands back before the time will come when Japanese will take these islands without even asking us. So this is the reason, and I would say a lot of people agree with this. But at the same time, you have other arguments, and people who are against doing this, they say that first of all, these islands don't belong to Japan, they belong to Russia. Secondly, Japan will never help Russia because Japanese have always hated Russians, and they would always hate a strong Russian state. So they would never help us to become strong and big again. And then they say if we give these islands back, then Germany would like to get back its, Königsberg, which is now Kaliningrad and part of Russia. It used to be a pure German city. And then other neighbors would like to take something too from Russia and ask something to, let's say, Chinese. We have negotiations with them about the border, and we refuse to give them 2 islands they asked near Khabarovsk. So the Chinese could say, how come you are so friendly with Japanese and not friendly with us? So that's the reasoning. And then these people say that we are very weak now, and we are lying on our back, and if we make such a concession now to Japan, Japanese will come to the conclusion that only force can help them to solve their problems. So they'll take these 4 islands, then they use force again to get, or pressure to get the rest of the Kuril Islands, and then they'll ask something from Korea, they'll ask something from Taiwan, and that's actually what people, especially in South Korea, and some of the officials in Taiwan say, don't give Japanese those islands back. You don't understand Japanese. As soon as you start making concessions to Japanese, political concessions, it would be no end to this process of, getting something from their neighbors, especially South Koreans. Anyone you talk to, never, or at least when you are strong. Not now, because now it would be a signal. And of course, a lot of people in Russia, simple people, they're against it because we had a great state, a superpower, it's collapsed, and we gave away so much, and now to give something else to Japan, if it would be Finland, it's okay. Finland is a small country, but to give something to Japan, it really would be a signal that we're nobody now. So we have this debate, and what would be the outcome of this debate, I don't know, but I'm sure that Yeltsin, he goes to Japan this autumn, and I think he's gonna propose to Japanese 2 islands. Why? Because in 1956, Khrushchev signed a communique with Japanese on the establishment of diplomatic relations, and in this communique, it says that we are ready to give these 2 islands, Havama and Shikotan, to Japanese if American troops leave Japanese territory. And now we're not against American presence in Japan, so there is no reason not to fulfill this obligation, and it's an international obligation. So I know that people in our government who have influence, they tell Yeltsin that he has to surrender those islands. So it's up to Yeltsin to decide to give those islands or not, and it's up to Japanese to agree on 2 islands or not, because they keep saying they need 4 islands, not 2 islands. It's a matter of principle. So this is our relations with Japan, and I think I have to stop here.
Well, thank you very much indeed. We thought we'd have some time for a discussion after such a wide-ranging talk. I'm sure there are lots of questions which will come up with various areas. So can I open it up to questions and discussion, please? Sorry, yeah.
Well, you didn't touch upon Mongolia or Mongolian.
Oh yeah, because I didn't have time.
Would you like to say something about that?
Yeah, well, Mongolia was a junior partner of the Soviet Union, and their President and Secretary General of the Communist Party, Tsedan Bal, he even couldn't write in Mongolian. He would write his report for the Communist Party Congress in Russian, and then it would be translated into Mongolian. He would read it. So we were very close. And as you know, we had his wife was Russian, and as we used to say, she was running Mongolia, not him. And we had a lot of soldiers there, and sometimes they didn't behave well, as it always happens with soldiers, at least in our case. And but we were close allies, of course. And then, you know what happened in Mongolia. They had some kind of a democratic revolution. And you can hear a lot of complaints now in Mongolia against Russia. First of all, you introduced communism into Mongolia, you destroyed our culture, you destroyed our people through Stalinist methods. Plus, you exploited us. We have abundant natural resources, and they say, if not the Soviet Union, we could become Kuwait or some of those rich Arab nations. It's only because of the Soviet Union we are so backward. And then they say that, some of them say that they want, some of our territory should belong to Mongolia. It's, you know, a place, Buryat, Mongolia, so some of those territories should go back to Mongolia. But some other people, this attitude is widespread. There are, you know, if you're Russian, if you go to Mongolia now, it's quite dangerous now in some places, because if they know you're Russian, you can be in trouble, you know, especially if you talk to hoodlums or drunk people, things like that. But at the same time, there is another argument. Some people say it's only because of Russia or because of the Soviet Union that Mongolia got its independence. Otherwise, it would be a part of China now. It's only because of it. So we have to thank Russians for this. Then they say that we need Russia as a partner because we're neighbors, and actually we have to only two neighbors, China and Russia. We shouldn't be pro-Chinese and we shouldn't be pro-Russian. We should have a balanced policy. And this is so the guilty party is not the Soviet government. The guilty party was the Mongolian government, who didn't understand that for Mongolia it was important to be, you know, on equal footing with Russia and China. And I think such attitude prevails in the Mongolian government, and many of those people there, they're former communists. Now they call themselves socialists. And they have personal links with Russia, you know, sometimes Russian wives, and their children have been studying in Russia for many years, and some of them live in Russia, and some of them speak Russian better than Mongolian. So because of this personal link, I would say that, and because Mongolians are very special people, you know, they live in steppes, and they're very calm people, so it's very hard, you know, to make Mongol nervous or aggressive. So it's easy to deal with them. And it's important too. And as a result, I think our relations are normal. They understand in the government they should have normal relations. And this attitude of their population is understandable, because the life in Mongolia is awful now, even worse than in Russia, economically and socially. And so you have to blame someone. And if you're a politician and if you want to be in power, of course you would use this Russian card, saying, you know why we have this problem, because of Russians and because this government is pro-Russian. So, but of course, some people say that sooner or later there would be a struggle between between Russia and China for Mongolia. Maybe in 50 years, maybe in 60 years, I don't know. We will have such a struggle, but now Russia has plenty of problems with Ukraine, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and to tell you the truth, we don't care about Mongolia. If they want to be a part of China, I think we'll say you're welcome. Now, as I said, maybe later it will change.
Okay, Leo and then Colin.
And there was quite a bit of talk about the creation of free economic zones in Morsky Krai, Nahotka, etc., etc. My question is, do you see any role in economic relations between Russia and its neighbors through these economic zones, and what is the situation with the creation of the zone? Because there was quite a friction between the center and the local authorities.
Yeah, you know, there is a basic difference, I think, between Chinese and Russian in many respects, and this is one of those areas. Deng Xiaoping in 1979 said we should have free economic zones, and in 1 year these zones functioned already for them. We started to talk about economic zones 7 years ago, and they don't exist yet. In practice, on paper, yes. But I remember in 1986, Gorbachev said we should open Vladivostok, and we have to have a special economic zone. 3 years later, I was present at a meeting where, you know, Yakovlev was presiding this meeting, and we had Akhrameyev and some other generals. And Yakovlev said, so what's the situation with Vladivostok and with the special economic zone in Khabarovsk, Nakhodka? And Akhrameyev said to him, as our general who died, committed suicide, Marshal actually, he said, well, we're working on analyzing potential negative effects of the opening Vladivostok on our security. And Yakovlev said, for how long are you going to continue this research? He said, we'll finish it by the year 2000. And he said, well, by that time the whole world will be open, only Vladivostok will be. He said, but you should understand, we have our fleet there, And Yakovlev said, well, Chinese have their fleet in Shanghai, in Guangzhou, in Xiamen, but they're not only open, they welcome foreigners there, they beg them to come there. And Akhramiev said, no, even after the year of 2000, they wouldn't be completely open. What we can allow, we would be able to allow foreigners to come there, stay, but it wouldn't be possible for them to stay overnight. They would have to go to Nakhodka or Khabarovsk to stay there. So that was in 1989. And he said, well, Yakovlev said, what about Gorbachev? He promised it already. He said, no, he promised, and that's why we're working on this project. And so this was the political obstacle. And it's still there, not as strong, but we still have military people with military interests, and of course you can go now to Vladivostok, but to create an economic zone is very hard. And some people don't, I mean those who favor such economic zones, they don't understand, they say look at China, Shenzhen is so successful, but Shenzhen is close to Hong Kong, and they have Chinese in Hong Kong who are ready to help Chinese and to help themselves through Shenzhen. But who is going to come to Vladivostok? Japanese? I doubt. South Koreans? Well, maybe North Koreans. No. So it's hard, and because of this, different laws, we change laws all the time. Our economic situation is so bad, and you have the struggle between the central government and local government. Well, I can talk for a long time about this, but your question was, what's the situation? I would say that we don't have any economic zones, and the only one which is starting to function is Kaliningrad economic zone. But actually, even there, they have a very beautiful plan how to develop it, and they try to invite first of all Germans, and then capital even from Arab countries, because they don't want just Germans to be there. And Germans are coming there, but there is no place to stay in Kaliningrad, no place at all. So they have to stay in Lithuania and just to visit Kaliningrad. And when they come there, most of those Germans, they come with papers which show that, like, this building used to belong to his family in the 19th century, so it has to go back to him, like what they do now in East Germany. So they're coming, they're interested, but nobody's putting money there yet. Though everything is ready because the local leadership is very market-minded, but in all other parts it's just talk. It's fashionable because they say, look at China, it's so beautiful there, let's have them. But nobody knows how to do it, and nobody knows who is going to go there. And there's no money for infrastructure.
Okay. Colin?
Yeah, there have been lots of attempts to establish political groupings in the Pacific area. I mean, for example, Australia took the initiative in setting up APEC.
Yeah.
Now, I know that, of course, Russia is not a member, but now what is the attitude of the government in Russia?
To political groupings?
To political groupings in the
Not
Pacific.
economic, political groupings.
Political groupings. Maybe.
Well, I'm sure you know the attitude of Gorbachev. He was the one who proposed all these ideas. At least he thought he was the first one who proposed those ideas. And he proposed many of them, quite different. And I even can explain why they were so different, but probably we don't need to discuss it. But anyway, he had a lot of ideas, but as I said already, we have a completely different situation in Russia. And we have no time for this beautiful and grand ideas. We want to save our country, we need economic assistance and good relations with everybody. And if you ask us, are we going to propose any new ideas, there is a firm understanding in our Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We don't need any new grand ideas. Because, this, it was our tradition to have some large-scale propositions, not only under communism, even before. I read, remember, memoirs of an Italian diplomat of the 16th century about his dealings with Russian diplomats, and he was amazed. He writes in his book, Russians always propose, large-scale projects, ideas of security, something like that, and always try to make a sign. I mean, always ask you to sign those documents and things like that. So it's a tradition, so sooner or later we'll come to this again, because it's a long-standing tradition. But now, as I said, it's a decision by Yeltsin, by his government, not to advance any ideas of this sort, and even if they wanted to advance those ideas, they didn't have time to work them out. And as I said, we don't need them now. But if Australia, as I know it, Australia has such an idea, not only Australia, even in ASEAN countries, you can find some support. If this idea develops, I think Russia, of course, will join without any question, as everybody else, or almost everybody else.
Could I just follow the economic point? Because if the world divides up into a number of different trade blocks, and obviously there would be three main ones perhaps, what would the Russian attitude be to that?
Well, I think we'll try to be in every block. and we can, because, you know, we're, as I said, we think we're a European state, we're an Asian state, we're a Pacific state. Yeah. So, you know, if we can get something from it. You know, it's a completely different country now. I don't know for how long. Maybe it will be again like we used to be. But now it's, you know, if we think it's good, you know, to get some money there and to get some assistance, we are ready. But you know, in some cases, our partners are not so ready to accept Russia. Americans maybe still for political reasons in Asia. Some other countries because our economy is in chaos and it's not convenient to have such a partner in your group. But we're quite active. I think in Sydney they had a meeting recently of this economic organization in the Pacific, and people from Moscow couldn't come because we don't have money now. I mean, it's difficult to get money to fly here. But people from our embassy from Canada went to Sydney. If you have something in Melbourne, I'm sure they will come.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
I read the People's Daily yesterday. I saw so far so many presidents of the republic countries, republic states already visit China, and I'm not quite sure why the Chinese government have such a very positive attitude to invite this president to come to visit China.
Well, because they're neighbors, and China is afraid that, first of all, there would be a chaos in those areas.
Yeah.
And especially what they're afraid of, that the Muslims will take power in those areas, and it would be a grave danger to China. So they want to be friends with these leading circles of those countries, and to make sure that even if Muslims come to power there, China stay friends with them. Because Chinese have Muslims too, and you know, if Tajiks in Tajikistan have their independence, sooner or later Tajiks in China would say, why we need this, you know, government in Beijing? Let's unite with our brothers in Tajikistan, with our brothers in Iran. So it's very dangerous. They want to keep, you know, relations with them. Number one. Number two, economic reasons. They're close and they want to have trade with them. And number three is Taiwan, because they're afraid that all those countries, they go to Taiwan. All of them are poor. All of them need money. And Taiwanese have a lot of money. So they come to Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan. They say, you need money, okay? Let's have consular relations. So they want to keep them from Taiwan, and plus they want to keep them from dissidents. You know, of course, Tajikistan not a very democratic state, but let's say Ukraine is quite democratic. Ukrainians invite Chinese dissidents who come to Ukraine and make speeches about, you know, bandits and Beijing. So they want to, you know, to not to allow this to happen. That's why they're so active. From my point of view.
You made the point that there are some in Russia now who think that China would collapse. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, what are the reasons, concrete reasons of thinking so? And more importantly, what are the views of those who have served on the China desk in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs?
Well, the second question is easier, but the first one I need at least 30 minutes to answer. Because, you know, otherwise it would be convincing. But the reason would be just, you know, to remember. First of all, Chinese economy is not well, you're an economist, I'm not. I'm just repeating what people say in Moscow. Not in a good shape. Just to give you one example, 60% of the enterprises are not effective.
State?
Yeah, 60%. But of course, the state is the basis. So this is industry, agriculture. You have private plots, or almost private plots, and as you know, productivity cannot grow up, and population goes up. And acreage, I mean, lands which can be used for agriculture, less and less in China. And China is one of the worst countries in this sense, as you know, land. So agriculture can be in big trouble too, economic reasons, social reasons. You have unemployment in agriculture, about 100 million people. You have unemployment in industry, very low salaries. You have intelligentsia, and its position is very hard, and that's what every representative of Chinese intellectual class would say to you. And then you have these party officials and government officials who make a lot of money through their friends, you know, uncles, etc. As I remember, I went to one Chinese city, and at that time it was not allowed to have more than 4 workers in your private plant. And I see this plant, 300 persons working there, and I say, how come? What is this? Who are these people? Oh, they're my relatives. Father, this is uncle, this is second uncle, this is third uncle. And people see it, and they're very unhappy. They say, look at these corrupted idiots. Like what, you know why I think our communist system collapsed? There were many reasons, but one of the main reasons was that our party was corrupted. People hated this party for being corrupted, not for some, you know, ideological things, but for doing this, for hypocrisy and for corruption. The same in China. So social element. Then you have ideological problem. Who believes in socialism in China? In Guangzhou, when you try to buy People's Daily, people laugh at you. Say, People's Daily? You want to buy in Guangzhou People's Daily? Are you crazy? Yeah, even in '85, I remember, I tried to buy People's Daily in Guangzhou, in Hainan Island. And, there was a laugh. So, and you know, this society cannot exist on the basis of this ideology when nobody believes in this ideology. Or you do it through force, like Stalin did and Mao. Well, during that time, some people believed. And now they don't want to use force, and so it's collapsing. I mean, this ideological basis. Plus, you have a new class growing up in China, businessmen. Do they need communism? Do they need this communist party? It's like in Vietnam, in any communist country. You know, if you have businessmen, why in hell they would need the communist party? Even peasants now, they say, why we need this party leader in our village to get money from us and bribes? So this is ideological problem. Then we have ethnic problems, Xinjiang, Tibet, and very important areas of China. And plus you have political problems. You have Deng Xiaoping, who is boss number 1. Tomorrow he goes, who's going to get the power? You have Jiang Zemin, who is, as they say, nobody. You have Le Pen, who is a conservative. You have a lot of people who are quite liberal, and I mentioned some, you know, of their attitudes. And because China has so many problems, and because all of these groups want to be in power just to be in power, it would be a real competition between them, and I'm not sure it would be a very peaceful competition. And you will have, you know, interior provinces who are not happy with provinces near the sea, and well, you know all this part. And plus, you have intelligentsia, and you have students who still remember Tiananmen, who would use this situation in the Chinese leadership if it becomes split again, to, you know, like when they criticized Zhao Ziyan. The main reason was that, you know, why they had those uprisings in Beijing, because Zhao Ziyan showed to these people that there is a split in the Chinese leadership, and they used it, you know, to start all this campaign and to take Zhao Ziyan and Hu Qili and Yang Mingshu on their side. So this was the main complaint, and I think if it happens again, if there is a split and it's visible, then these people who are on the ground now, they'll become more active. But as I said, it's a very difficult question, and of course you can argue with me and say even more sensible things to me against this reasoning. But that's what some people say. But if you ask me about our specialists, what is their position, I would say that it's hard, and I think we discussed it already the other day on the table. I wouldn't say there is a majority who would say that it's going to be this way. Different views. Many people, especially all the specialists, they say China is marvelous, and we always thought they were not good communists, and they are good communists, and they are good people, they have a very good economy, we should use the example of China, and we actually should even do something like they did in Tiananmen. So you find specialists like this, and older people. Younger people, different views, some of them Democrats, but they say that China is a special case, Chinese are clever people, they will be able to change their system peacefully and very slowly, like they do now, with the help of Deng Xiaoping. After Deng Xiaoping goes, somebody else will appear. And the third group says, no, they'll collapse as everybody collapses. Chinese, not Chinese, you look at the communist countries, different nationalities, but the same result. Romanians, different from Germans, Czechs different from Hungarians, but the result was the same. So it's going to happen in China sooner or later. So this is the...
Move from a big question to a small one. You mentioned the islands and the river. I had the impression that some of those questions have been settled last year.
Oh yes, most of them. There are only 2 islands near Khabarovsk, in Russian Tarabarov and Большой Уссурийский. We couldn't decide where they would go because they're important to us, and they think they belong to them. And we decided to sign an agreement on the eastern part of the border without these 2 islands, and we signed it already, this agreement. When Kozyrev was in China this year, it was finalized. So the eastern part is okay now, just 2 islands. Now we have to discuss the western part of the border. It used to be Soviet-Chinese border. Now it's not Soviet-Chinese border. It's Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan. So we have one team, Russians, Uzbeks, and all those people negotiating with Chinese. But now it's going to be much more difficult because Chinese used to propose in 1989 when Gorbachev was in China. They said, you give us those 2 islands near Khabarovsk, and we'll forgive you, those disputed areas in the Central Asia. Now we cannot have such an exchange because they don't belong to Russia, those areas. So we can say, okay, you take these islands and we'll take this because it doesn't belong to us. So it's a little bit more complicated, but this issue is not a very tough issue. They're interested, we're interested, and we have enough problems inside Russia and inside China and between us without the border, so I think we can manage with this somehow.
Yeah. And I take it they're being negotiated professionally without much trouble.
No, of course not. Yeah, we have very friendly personal relations now with them. Very friendly. They even bring wives to those negotiations. And every time, it's one time in Moscow, one time in Beijing, and they say, let's negotiate for 1 day, and then we'll take you to Shanghai, Suzhou, Hangzhou, Xiamen, and then when they come to Russia, they say we want to go here and there. So it's fun, not only.
That's different from some of
you.
Okay, so thank you.
You've emphasized right through your talk how the situation now in Russian foreign policy is different from what it was even under Gorbachev. How is that difference evident in terms of the way policy is made? In other words, if there is a major problem area, for example, relations with Japan, Northern Territories, how is policy actually made? Who are the players? How is it rationalized? How is that decision ultimately made? And how is that different from the way it used to be?
Well, it was very simple before, and very convenient for those who like the old system, and for those who like quick decisions. Like Deng Xiaoping says in China, it's democracy. Western style democracy is not good for China because it takes a long time to take decisions. In our system, you make decisions and it happens. So the way it was, I'm sure you know, everything was decided by the Central Committee of the Communist Party, actually by a Politburo. And actually the Politburo didn't decide anything. It was decided by people who worked in the Central Committee, clerks, I don't know how you call them, functionaries. So they would advance an idea. Well, when Gorbachev became the leader, it was a little bit different. He was active himself. So he would say, for example, when he came to power, we have to normalize relations with China. It's extremely important. So this Central Committee would develop some ideas. Then these ideas would go to Politburo. Politburo would adopt these ideas, and it would be a decision. Number 1, Ministry of Foreign Affairs to start negotiations on border issues with China and to prepare a draft of the, of the document how our border should be. Number 2, Security Minister to guarantee that there is no interference from Americans and others, in this process. Number 3, Ministry of Trade, to provide money for our delegations to go to China, etc. So everything was clear. All these documents went to these different ministries, and then everybody would see what he has to do. And there was a man in the Central Committee who would control all these decisions. So if, let's say, in 2 months there is no reply from the Ministry of Trade and no movements on the part of the Ministry of Trade, he would call them and say, Comrade Ivanov or Comrade Stalin, how come your ministry hasn't done this, and things like that. So, and the same with Vladivostok speech. That's the way it was prepared, and that's the way it was controlled. Everybody had to report what they did on this. So they would send, every organization would send some report that, let's say, we had talks with Australian communists who live in Moscow, and we explained them the peaceful nature of our policy in nation. So they would write a report like this and would go to the Central Committee of the Communist Party. Now it's much more complicated and it's much less organized. Actually, there is no, if you like to write a book on this now, you won't be able to do it. Even an article, because it's really disorganized. And to give you a few examples, I mean, I'm not proud of this. As I said, we're in such a position now. You know, and I explain you why. You know, our foreign minister, Kozak, he goes to France and Britain. When he is in France and Britain, in the parliament, they say, we have such a bad life here. We have so many problems with China, Japan, Korea, and this man, he goes to France and England, he drinks, he visits you know, beautiful places in those countries, so he is criticized for being there. He comes back, and because of this criticism, he immediately goes to Asia, to China, Japan, and South Korea. When he is there, he is criticized by Yeltsin already, that how come we have so many problems with Ukraine, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and this guy, you know, he is against somewhere else. So he comes back and he immediately goes to Armenia, Azerbaijan. When he is there, he is criticized. There is nobody who can sign documents in the ministry. So you go with a document, even about our diplomatic academy, nobody can sign. So, you know, so many problems, and it's so difficult to solve all those problems. Plus, the old pyramid has been destroyed, and there is no new one. I mean, Yeltsin has some advisors, and they don't know what kind of responsibility they have. And who is above the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and besides the Ministry of Foreign Affairs we have Defense Ministry, and before everything went to the Central Committee. Now there is no, you know, no real apparatus, it's just state advisors, and as I said, they even don't know what they're supposed to do. So what happens is that a friend of mine who is director of the Asian department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and who is in charge of our policy to China, he told me that when Kozak went to China, he even didn't ask for any documents. And he said, I didn't know he was going to China. He just called me 2 or 3 hours before, you know, before the visit. He said, pack your things, we will go to China. And he said in China he never asked me any questions, so he didn't have any even documents going to China. And not because he is a bad minister, it's a situation. And you have people at the ministry who, at Foreign Affairs, who say, you know, like Yeltsin says something on Japan, and I asked this man who is in charge of our policy toward Japan, did you write this speech? He said, I never heard about this. I mean, I just read it in the newspaper. Who wrote this speech? Nobody knows. So, and I know that bureaucracies are not perfect in other countries too. They are not perfect in Australia, in the United States, and you have this kind of competition between different organizations. But at this point, we don't have any even bad bureaucracy. It's just vacuum. So I'm sure it will develop, but at this point it's quite, you know, many people in the foreign ministry even don't get salaries because they used to work in this ministry of the Soviet Union. Now they're still there, and the minister says you're going to work here, but they're not paid salaries because the bookkeeper says that we are not on the roll of the Ministry of Russia. And even with IDs, you know, I have an ID, it says Diplomatic Academy, USSR Foreign Ministry. So when I go, and with this ID, they're supposed to let you in every organization. I go to some place, and I see this policeman, he looks at this ID and says, I cannot let you in. I say, why? Because it says here USSR. I said, they don't have time, they haven't had time to change those IDs, and they don't have paper to change. So, you know, it's quite...
Okay, we'll be finishing in a few minutes. I've got 2 questions on the floor there that I think will perhaps be the last 2. Okay? Yes.
I've got 2 questions. One is actually, throughout your career, you have represented, you know, and articulated the interest of superpower and diplomats such as yourself.
Yeah.
And how have you adjusted to this change?
Personally?
I mean, yeah, diplomats such as yourself. And the second question I have is actually drawing your attention away from the Pacific and rather to the Indian Ocean, about the current state of Russia's relations with India.
Okay, well, the first question is, we have different people and they've adjusted differently. As our foreign minister says, he wrote an article recently, I think in Independent, where he said that 60% of people who work at the ministry, they're cynics and communists, and he wants to purge them. And maybe he's right, maybe he's not, but of course you find a lot of people who are angry with Gorbachev, with Yeltsin, and with what happened to Russia. At the same time, you find people who are real enthusiasts of these new policies, and some of them even say that we have to go further, you know, in becoming friends with the West, becoming part of NATO. So you find different people, different directions. But many of the people, they are unhappy not with our policy, but with their personal position. You know, their salaries is about 2,000 rubles, and now a kilo of meat is 300 rubles. So if you have 2 children, you can imagine how can you live on this money. So what they do, they try to have another job somewhere, and some of them become businessmen. So he's a businessman, and somebody who works at the foreign ministry. And some of them leave the ministry and become businessmen, and because they know languages, they know foreign countries, they have friends in other countries, businessmen use them and need them. So this is the situation. About the Indian Ocean, I know very well Indian ambassador in Moscow, Gonzalez, and he says that, well, he hates Yeltsin, and he hates Kozyrev. He says, sometimes I wake up at night, like I had a dream that Kozyrev became the foreign minister. and he's sitting in the same seat where the great Gromyko used to sit. And he said that he requested a meeting with Kozyrev 7 months ago, and he couldn't see Kozyrev. That's what he says. And all other Indian diplomats, you know, they don't like what's happening in Moscow. They say that socialism was not so bad after all. You influenced so much India and the rest of the world, and now you try to forget everything and to say that everything was awful. It's not correct, it's not right, and these new people, they're corrupted, they're stupid, and you are heading for a catastrophe. So this is their attitude toward our internal affairs. Their attitude toward the future of our relations, they say that our friendship was based on ideology. We had, basically, we had the same ideology. You know, we wanted to make this world better. We wanted to stop imperialism, and we wanted, and then they say that India, the foreign policy of India was based on the friendship with Russia, because India has traditional foes or adversaries, China, Pakistan, and all this, and all of this policy was based on having a friend in the north. Everything has gone. Ideology has gone, so we're not friends anymore, and because we're not friends anymore, our foreign policy has to be different, because it cannot be based on this foundation. So this is their attitude, and they say we don't care. You know, India is a big country, we're proud people, so if these clowns don't want to deal with India, it's up to them. But when I was here in Australia already, I learned from the press that Burbulis, #2 man, visited India, and I hope that we'll continue our good relations, because we have very warm feelings toward India. You know, we've been friends for so many years, and you know, India is a very popular country in Russia, and that's what Indian diplomats say too. They say that sometimes, you know, he drives a car and he's drunk, he's stopped by a policeman, and when he sees it's an Indian diplomat, he says, "Oh, India, our friend." And actually, Singapore diplomats, for example, complain very much. I have a friend in Singapore embassy, he left already, Murugan, he's Indian, Tamil, and he says to me, you know, it's outrageous. You know, they stop me for drunken driving, and they say, "Are you Indian?" He says, "No, Singapore." "Oh, Singapore." Fine. So, I mean, I think we have some basis for, and sooner or later, Russia won't be the same as it used to be. But I think when you have traditional interests, you cannot just, you know, they cannot disappear forever. Look at our relations with Germany. They had Hitler, we were enemies, but again, you know, a new period, and we're neighbors, and they're interested in us, and we're interested in them. And so I think sooner or later we'll go back to that.
Could I just have one small supplementary question on that? Have relations with Pakistan improved as the relations with India become somewhat more complicated?
Well, they've improved in the sense that the war is over in Afghanistan.
Yes.
Of course, they're not close, but and our relations even with Afghanistan quite good now. You know, Kozyrev went to Afghanistan. He was warmly received there by the people who used to live in Pakistan. You know, those mujahideen, call them. So I wouldn't say that our relations are very close, but they're quite normal. The only problem is Muslim issue. If something develops in Russia, let's say between Russia and Kazakhstan, Muslims against non-Muslims, and Pakistan, Iran, and all those countries, well, so nothing close, but at the same time they're better than they used to be, without any question.
Okay, we're running a little bit late now. We'll just have this final question.
Okay. My question is actually more about the internal situation right now, as in how real is the threat to Yeltsin by the right wing, and as in how softly does he have to tread with his new policies and administration, and where exactly does the support of the old military lie, because they must be having problems with assimilating them back into a system that no longer has a hierarchy.
Well, but you know.
I know. Just reform will be fine.
Well, I think it's serious in the sense that he has to deliver something else. Now he is the, from our point of view, not my personal, but from the point of view of majority of our people, he's a miracle maker. You know, we had a communist system, it was bad in many ways, but then Gorbachev came and he ruined everything, even what we had. And now the only savior we have is Yeltsin, who fought against that system, who fought against Gorbachev. People trusted him, and he promised to make it better. So people wait for his miracles, and he has to deliver. Economically, you know, economy should develop, and of course socially, you know, with these prices going up, with these differences, some people get rich and 90% live below the poverty line. Plus the ethnic issue. If Russians are in trouble in Moldavia, Latvia, Estonia, you know, etc., etc. And if Yeltsin doesn't do anything and people get killed and we have refugees coming from those areas in millions, then he's going to be in trouble. And if we have a complete chaos from the point of view of law and order, you know, when criminals do whatever they want, but sooner or later, now people still believe in him. Maybe in 1 year they'll still believe in him. And now he uses different, you know, from my point of view, tricks to, you know, to sustain this popularity. And like now they decided to put the Communist Party on trial in all these beautiful services instead of fighting with Ukraine about the fleet in the Black Sea. But finally he has to, as I said, to deliver something. If he doesn't in 2 or 3 years, and if we still have a chaos, sooner or later I think the right wing can grow up. And it grows already. If you look at Zhirinovsky, who is a complete clown, he commands what now, about 15% of popularity among 50% of our people. And when you listen to him, you know, he's the best speaker in our country. Gorbachev was the worst one, though in the West they think he was very good. This one is the best one. Military people ask him, you know, we're in trouble now. He says, if I become the president, you won't be in trouble. Every soldier will get more money than the president of the United States. And he says it very seriously, you know, like this. Problems with Latvia. It's very easy. I'll build a nuclear plant on the border with Latvia and blow it up. In 3 days there won't be any Latvians. Finland, no problem with Finland. What you have to do, you have to take the map of the 19th century Russia, and you'll see that Finland is inside Russia. So you should go there, no problem. And with Pakistan, you know what he says? He says they don't want to give back our prisoners of war. We sent 4 ships to Pakistan. On the first day there is no Karachi. On the second day no Islamabad. On the third day no Pakistan. And you know, when you are hungry, when your life is so troubled and you have so many traitors around you, you know, Gorbachev and all that, it's very nice to hear things like that. He is a clown, but if somebody more serious, but with the same, basically the same ideas, will arise. And now we have Rutskoy, who is already, I think, coming up, and he is much more serious, and but he has basically similar ideas. So the threat is there. I don't think we should overlook this threat. And military, they're divided too, of course. You have generals who still believe in, I don't know in what, but in all times. And you have colonels who say that generals have too much, we don't have much. Then you have, you know, sergeants or lieutenants who served in Latvia, Estonia, Latvia. Now they have to go back, but they don't know where. They don't have housing, they don't have salaries, they don't have work, and they're very angry. And I heard one woman on the radio a few days, well, months ago. She is a wife of one officer in Latvia. She says, I have 3 children, and we have to go somewhere in Russia. We don't know where. So the only choice for me is to take the machine gun of my husband and shoot everybody realm, and she said it on the Russian radio. So it's a very difficult situation. But you know, we had an empire and it's collapsed, and every time you have collapse an empire, you have problems. Plus, we want to change our system of beliefs, which is has difficulties, I think.
Well, can I thank Evgeny very much for giving a most sort of thorough and stimulating sort of survey, and let's just say thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you.